On the 31st of October, 2005, at 1:46 in the morning, inside the Ruber International Hospital in Madrid, a baby girl was born by caesarean section to Felipe and Letizia, then the Prince and Princess of Asturias. Her name was Leonor, and her birth was announced to the Spanish press not by formal statement or royal proclamation, but by text message. It is a small detail, almost forgettable, but it tells you something about how the modern Spanish monarchy has tried to present itself to its public. Modern, direct, stripped of some of the older ceremony that once surrounded royal births. But there was one part of that birth that was not stripped of ceremony at all. It was handled with more secrecy, more logistics, and more quiet controversy than almost anything else connected to Leonor's early life. And it has almost nothing to do with the palace, the constitution, or the line of succession. It has to do with her umbilical cord. In the moments after Leonor was delivered, a specialist doctor in the delivery room performed a task that had nothing to do with the birth itself. Her umbilical cord was clamped, collected, and prepared for transport. Instead of being discarded as medical waste, the way it is for the overwhelming majority of babies born anywhere in the world, Leonor's cord blood was packaged, secured, and shipped across the Atlantic Ocean to a private facility in Tucson, Arizona, called Cord Blood Registry, commonly known by its initials, CBR. It is not a detail the palace hid outright, it emerged in Spanish press coverage at the time, and Felipe himself referenced it publicly 2 years later, in 2007, when his second daughter Sofia was born. But it never became a major headline. It sat quietly in the margins of royal biography, the kind of fact repeated in passing on royalty fan sites and rarely examined for what it actually reveals. And what it reveals, looked at honestly and in light of what has come out in the years since, is genuinely worth 20 minutes of your time. Let's start with what cord blood banking actually is, because the term gets thrown around without much explanation, and understanding it is the key to understanding why Felipe and Letizia's decision mattered. When a baby is born, the blood remaining in the umbilical cord and placenta is rich in a particular kind of cell called hematopoietic stem cells. These are the building blocks of the body's blood and immune system, and under the right circumstances, they can be used in transplants to treat certain blood cancers, immune disorders, and metabolic diseases. For decades, that cord blood was simply thrown away after birth, considered medical waste with no further use. Starting in the early 1990s, a new industry emerged around collecting, freezing, and storing that blood instead, on the theory that if a child or a family member ever developed one of a certain narrow set of diseases, the stored blood could become a life-saving resource, a kind of biological insurance policy purchased at the moment of birth. Cord Blood Registry, the company Felipe and Letizia chose, was among the earliest and largest players in that industry. It was founded in the mid-1990s, incorporated in California, though its primary processing and storage facility has long operated out of Tucson, in partnership originally with a University of Arizona medical program. By the time Leonor was born in 2005, CBR had already built a reputation, and a substantial client base, as the go-to private cord blood bank for families who could afford it. And that, if you could afford it, detail is not incidental. Private cord blood banking is expensive. It typically involves an upfront collection and processing fee running into the thousands of dollars, followed by ongoing annual storage fees. For as long as the family wants the sample kept frozen. It is, by design, a service marketed to families with disposable income, families who can treat the birth of a child as an opportunity to also make a long-term financial and medical bet. For a royal family, that expense is obviously not a barrier. What made the decision noteworthy in Spain at the time was something different, the fact that Leonor's cord blood went to a private, for-profit American company rather than to Spain's own public cord blood banking system. Spain, as it happens, has one of the most respected public cord blood donation networks in the world. Spanish public banks operate on a donation model, where parents can choose to donate their newborn's cord blood free of charge to a shared public registry, making it available to any patient in need of a matching transplant, anywhere, rather than reserving it exclusively for the donor family. It is widely regarded, including by many bioethicists, as the more socially beneficial model, because the statistical odds that a specific child will ever need to use their own privately banked cord blood are extremely low, while a public donation has a real chance of helping a stranger who actually develops a matching illness. When it became known that the heir to the Spanish throne's cord blood had bypassed this well-regarded public system entirely in favor of a private American facility, it sparked exactly the kind of quiet public debate that gets described, years later, in royal biographies with a single understated sentence: "This decision sparked public debate in Spain, as the blood bank was private and located abroad." When Sofia was born in 2007, Felipe addressed the choice directly, and his own words are worth sitting with, because they tell you how the family understood the decision at the time. Felipe explained that they had kept the umbilical cord as they had with Leonor, describing it as something the couple had a great deal of confidence in, and something they believed in, citing what he called rapid advances in science and medicine in this area. For Sofia's birth, the family split the difference. 2 bags of cord blood were collected, with one sent to a public bank and the other sent to a private bank in Europe, a hybrid approach that seems to reflect at least some awareness of the criticism that had followed Leonor's case, without fully abandoning the instinct toward private storage. It is a small but telling adjustment, one that suggests the family was listening, even if they never addressed the Tucson decision head-on in detail. Now here is where the story becomes genuinely relevant today, in the summer of 2026, rather than simply an interesting historical footnote from 21 years ago. Cord Blood Registry, the company holding Leonor's stem cells, has spent the last year and a half at the center of a serious legal and regulatory reckoning in the United States. In March of 2025, the Arizona Attorney General, Chris Mays, filed a lawsuit against CBR, accusing the company of deceptive and unfair practices. The core of the complaint is worth understanding in plain terms. Mays alleged that CBR marketed private cord blood storage to new parents using inflated, misleading claims about how likely that stored blood was ever to be medically useful, describing it in its own advertising as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity with the potential to treat more than 80 conditions. According to the lawsuit, independent experts estimate the real-world odds that a child will ever actually need to use their own privately stored cord blood fall somewhere between 1 in 400 and 1 in 200,000 over that child's entire lifetime, a dramatically different picture than the marketing language suggests. The lawsuit also alleged the company paid doctors kickbacks of up to $700 for every sample they steered toward CBR rather than the free public donation system, and separately raised concerns about the physical handling of samples during transport to Tucson, alleging in some cases a lack of the strict temperature controls needed to keep the cells viable. Texas followed with a similar lawsuit roughly a year later, in early 2026, and California's Attorney General had already issued a public consumer warning about the cord blood banking industry before that. Reporting from the New York Times, cited across multiple outlets covering these cases, found that despite more than 2 million cord blood samples being stored across the United States, roughly half of them at CBR's Tucson facility specifically, only 19 documented transplants using a child's own privately stored cord blood have occurred since 2010. Federal inspectors, according to that same reporting, found signs of bacterial contamination at CBR's storage facility. A former employee at the Tucson site told a local news outlet that the operation functioned, in her words, as a sales job rather than a genuine support or medical service. In November of 2025, an Arizona judge declined to dismiss the consumer fraud claims against CBR, allowing the case to move forward, while noting that some of the state's allegations were likely overly broad and would need to be narrowed as the litigation continues. As of this recording, the lawsuits are ongoing, and CBR has not been found liable in a final judgment. These remain allegations working their way through the courts, not settled legal conclusions, and it would be inaccurate to present them as anything more definitive than that. So what does any of this actually mean for Leonor, more than 2 decades after her birth? Here, it is important to be precise about what is fact and what is reasonable inference, because those are 2 different things. It is a confirmed fact, reported at the time and repeated consistently in biographical sources since, that Leonor's cord blood was sent specifically to Cord Blood Registry's Tucson facility in 2005. It is also a confirmed fact that this same company and this same facility are now the subject of active state lawsuits alleging deceptive marketing and inconsistent handling of stored samples. What is not confirmed, and what no source available anywhere states, is whether Leonor's specific sample has ever been affected by any contamination issue, whether it remains viable, or whether the Spanish royal household has said anything publicly about the ongoing litigation involving the company they chose. There is no statement from Zarzuela Palace addressing the CBR lawsuits. There is no indication the family has withdrawn the sample, transferred it elsewhere, or commented on the broader industry concerns raised by regulators in 2 American states. That silence may simply reflect that this is, for the palace, a closed, decades-old, low-priority medical decision rather than a matter of any current public interest. It would be irresponsible to fill that silence with speculation about what it might mean, and this script won't do that. What can be said honestly is this: the future Queen of Spain has, sitting frozen in a facility now facing serious allegations of misleading its customers, a piece of biological material that her parents once described with real confidence and optimism, collected at a moment when the private cord blood industry was younger, less scrutinized, and largely untested by the kind of regulatory action now unfolding 2 decades later. There is a broader lesson buried in this story that goes beyond royal trivia, and it is worth drawing out before closing. Leonor and Sophia's births happened to fall at a moment when private cord blood banking was being marketed, aggressively and with enormous emotional appeal, to parents around the world as an act of protective foresight, a way of hedging against tragedy before it could strike. Philippe's own words in 2007 echo that marketing almost exactly: confidence in the science, belief in the potential, a sense that this was simply what informed, resourced parents did for their children. 2 decades later, the regulatory record tells a more complicated story, one in which some of the largest companies in that industry are now accused, in courts of law, of overstating exactly those odds to exactly those emotionally invested parents. Millions of families around the world made a version of the same choice the Spanish royal family made in 2005, often paying thousands of dollars for a service whose statistical usefulness turned out to be far smaller than advertised. In that sense, Leonor's story is not really about royal secrecy at all. It is a very human story, shared by an enormous number of ordinary parents who wanted to do everything possible to protect a newborn child, dressed up, in this one case, in a crown. What we are left with, then, is not a scandal in any dramatic sense, and this script will not pretend otherwise. It is something quieter and, in its own way, more interesting: a small, mostly overlooked decision made in a Madrid hospital room in 2005, involving a piece of medical technology still finding its footing, that connects a future Queen of Spain to a legal fight now playing out in courtrooms in Phoenix and Austin, over an industry that promised more certainty than it could deliver. Whether Leonor's own sample is ever needed, whether it remains usable, whether the palace ever addresses the company's legal troubles at all, these are open questions, and honest reporting has to leave them open rather than resolve them with speculation dressed up as revelation. What we know for certain is this: somewhere in a storage facility in the Arizona desert, 21 years after her birth, a small vial connected to Spain's future head of state sits alongside more than 1 million others, at the center of a legal reckoning that neither she nor her parents could possibly have anticipated the day that doctor clamped her umbilical cord and sent it across an ocean.